When he turned his back from shoulder to shoulder, it looked like as wide as the tailgate of a truck.
And just darkness, literal darkness, just came like all over, just all over me except where I was standing.
This thing let out the most blood-curdling, mind-blowing, spine-tingling scream that you've ever heard in your life, and it cut through me like a knife.
And I knew that they were going to take me. I just knew it. And then the next thing I can remember is being levitated.
Well, when I look in there, I see two big eyes staring back at me.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Bump Podcast, a place for the believers of the unexplained, monsters, and paranormal. Join us, and we'll go face to face with what goes bump in the night. Hey there, believers. Got a good show for you today. You know, I know I'm putting out shows every week, but it's been about a month since I've actually recorded an episode with anybody. So I'm trying to shake the dust off, shake off the cobwebs, because I want my full attention to be devoted to this episode. We're getting into ancient giants and the theory of how they got to America. I'm talking to Mr. Adam Stokes. He has degrees from Yale Divinity School, from Duke University. He's got a book that I found on Amazon. I'm super excited to have him on. I'm sure he's a wealth of knowledge. He reached out to me on Instagram and just sly asked me, "Hey, do you like giants?" Yes, of course. That's one of my favorite things on the planet, round or flat. But yeah, we started talking and I started digging in, doing a little snooping around. This guy, I'm so pumped to talk to him. So I'm going to bring him on right now and let him introduce himself. And we're going to talk about giants, man. Here we go. While we wait for Adam to join us here, I sent him the link to get on Zoom. But while we wait, I just want to thank everybody for the huge response to my Scott Walter episode and to the one with Flat Earth Dave. I had a TikTok promo absolutely explode over this Flat Earth stuff. I had no clue. In less than 24 hours, it had like 11,000 views. It had 10,000 in the first 6 hours. The lid blew off that thing. So thank you guys for the big response. Thank you to all my new listeners, new subscribers on YouTube. We're up to about 250,000 right now. Shit, I wish. We're up to about 250 subscribers right now. We're trying to get to 1,000. If I can get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, you guys know how that works. Just doing everything I can to help this show to grow. We had a very fun time at the Braxy Bazaar. A lot of people showed up. A lot of merch went out. I sold out of my paintings. I got to do some more. Big thank you to Trevor and his daughter for their interest in a couple of those paintings. I'm feeling really blessed. This show just seems to be growing, and everything is just falling into place. So as discouraging as some commenters might be, some of the hate mail might get a little, if I wasn't so thick skinned, it would get way more under my skin, but just all the effort that I've been putting in for the last year and a half to try to get this show off the ground seems like it's finally starting to take off, and it's because of you guys. And I thank you so much. There's a lot of support and a lot of love that pours in. It greatly outweighs the few haters that are out there. So please keep sharing the show. Please keep getting involved. Subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, whatever podcast player you want to listen to it on. And if you want to join Patreon or send a donation or whatever through that, I really appreciate that too. I'm trying to come up with something new for my patrons. Maybe do some behind the scenes stuff. Maybe some outtakes if we have outtakes. My guests have been, on the spot. I don't really have much on the line of bloopers, but maybe just some stuff about, my personal life and the home side of things. And I plan on doing a few more of these Sunday musings too. I've had a lot of people ask what happened to that. So maybe I'm not just babbling. Maybe it's something worth sticking out. So I just want to thank you guys and just let you know that every single one of you mean the world to me. And I just love it. I love all the private messages I get on Instagram. I made some true friends. I've had some people help me out when I get a little bummed, and I try to help people out that I feel like, God puts on my heart to reach out to. So I'll just keep doing that, and you guys keep doing what you do, and we'll keep the show going, okay? So in just a second, we'll bring Adam on.
All right.
All right, Adam. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for reaching out to me. I love giants. I'm completely fascinated. Everything. I don't know where this is going to go exactly. I don't know where your theory of giants, where they come from, will come into play. I've read a little bit of Dr. Michael Heiser's work, Gary Wayne's work. So I as of right now, I'm kind of, leaning towards descendants of the Nephilim, but I don't know if that's a scientific approach or not. You know what I mean? So wherever you're at, I would love to hear it. So I'll shut up and just let you take the floor, man.
All right, sounds good. Well, it's awesome to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I've been looking forward to this for a while. So, it's funny you mentioned the Nephilim, because in my research and wrote a book about a couple years back on this, talking about the Nephilim. So ancient astronaut people, you read Von Daniken, you read Zechariah Stitchin, they say that, the giants of these ancient texts of the Old Testament, of ancient Near Eastern texts, these were aliens who crash landed on the planet, and they were of incredible height. And this kind of gets picked up in pop culture. For example, one of my favorite movies, Prometheus, where you have these giants from millions of years ago. They come, and the giant falls into the water. He breaks into like a billion pieces, and his DNA becomes the DNA of humanity. I'm not sure. I believe in aliens. I absolutely believe in aliens from my whole heart. But I'm not sure if we need like an alien hypothesis for this. I think that, so the term Nephilim just comes from the Hebrew word nephal, meaning to fall or fallen ones. And so I've always just taken that as a reference to, as I've told others in other podcasts, a reference to an ancient civilization that fell. So these people were literally the fallen ones. They had fallen from their height of glory. So kind of like how we talk about the fall of the Confederacy, or the fall of the Soviet Union, or the fall of the Roman Empire, right. In that sense. So not necessarily having an extraterrestrial origin, though I don't want to completely dismiss that, but my own view is that the giants, especially the giants you get in North America, came from here. So they were indigenous to the earth. Wow.
Okay. Well, this is gonna be new. This is different than what I've read, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So your book, I believe it was called something like from Egypt to Ohio.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So does that mean that this giant race of man originated in Egypt? Or
well, I say so yeah, that's it's a little bit complicated. Okay. I'll try and go through it. So what I say is basically you have at the very beginning of the Bible, which claims to be the beginning of history, but really reflects, if you look a lot at those early stories, the Garden of Eden, the Noah story, they reflect a time. They seem to preserve a time in history even before what the writers of the Bible would have considered history. So if you look at all those stories, these giants are always there. We don't know where they come from. They come from some ancient lost civilization. I would say Atlantis, if I had to make a guess about it. But they intermingle throughout in the ancient Near East. They intermingle with the Israelites and with the Egyptians. And the Israelites and the Egyptians, they're always seen as bad guys, like they're always seen as enemies of each other.
Yes.
So in the Ten Commandments, for example, you have Moses against Yul-Brynner, the Pharaoh, and it seems like the Israelites hate Egypt, but they intermarried, they interacted quite a bit, and they adopted a lot of features of each other's culture. So, for example, Egyptian, just like Hebrew, is a Semitic language. So Egyptian hieroglyphics is at its base a Semitic language, just like Hebrew. So the Israelites and Egyptians did a lot of stuff together. They both interacted with giants, and from this interaction, this sexual interaction, you often got a race of what I like to call Egypto-Israelite giants. And these Egypto-Israelite giants, for various reasons, and I argue in my book, whenever there was kind of a national disaster, such as the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 586 BCE, the second destruction in 70 CE, or the destruction of the Northern Kingdom by the Assyrians in 722 BCE, this kind of giant hybrid race fled west, and they kept going. They went across the sea and landed in North America. And so that's why in the Great Lakes region, especially around Ohio, you seem to have a culture with a lot of Semitic features. So the Hopewell and the Adena cultures,
Yes.
that archaeologists, mainstream archaeologists talk about, they seem to have had a lot of features parallel to what we get with the Israelites in the old world, and also their culture, not just paralleled it, but there seem to be exact features of their culture that are Semitic. So very, very fascinating groups, the Hopewell and Adena. And that's not their names, by the way. Those names were assigned to them in the 19th century by the dudes who found their sites. So the Native Americans just called them the Mound Builders. Again, such an old race that nobody knows really where they came from.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard the same thing with the Hopewell, the Adena. That's just a name that was thrown on them.
Yeah.
Like I told you before we started recording, I live in Southern West Virginia, and I'm in Logan County. I'm not sure if there's any mounds in Logan County. There may be, but I don't know of any. But nearby in Kanawha County, where our state capital is, there's several mounds that are still standing, and a lot of them were plowed over or whatever. And well,
you guys have one of the most famous mounds, the Grave Creek Mound.
Yes.
And it's funny because if you're on the highway going from West Virginia into Ohio into Kentucky, all those mounds are kind of like on the same grid. I was mentioning this in another podcast. I think you could almost argue for ley lines. They're same. You can visit the Grave Creek Mound, then the Newark Earthworks, and the Fort Ancient Earthworks, all in the same line.
Wow. See, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
But West Virginia, that's right. And we like I often tell people, we put these imaginary borders on the states and stuff, but
right.
For the Hopewell Adena, there was no difference between West Virginia and Ohio. It was all part of their empire.
Right. So let me ask. Now, I know you just said that nobody knows 100% for certain, but where did this giant gene come from? Are they a separate species or whatever? Like, it's not Homo sapien or Cro-Magnon man or anything? Was there always a giant race, competing this whole time? Or
that's a good question. So you have and I caused some confusion with this myself, but you have to make a kind of a distinction. So I think the giants that we get, in the Bible, for example, the Nephilim, they were always giants. They were a race of giants. they interacted with us normal-sized humans, often in a very negative way.
Mhm.
So you have giants that were just straight up giants, and then you have giants who are kind of a mixture of these two groups. So you have extraordinarily tall people, but they have regular human DNA in their bloodline, and I think this explains across the globe how you have these different descriptions of giants. So in Greek mythology, for example, you have the Cyclopses. In Irish mythology, you have other types of giants who seem to basically be human. So there's an Irish warrior giant. She basically looks human, but she's just really tall. And then you have giants that don't look anything like human beings at all. And I think this comes from giants interbreeding with normal humans, as well as these different species of giant that have always been kind of giant.
Okay. So are you in agreement that the Nephilim are involved with?
Well, like I said, I interpret the term Nephilim different.
Okay.
Just as being this race of giants that always existed. I've never actually, it'll be interesting to follow it, where they come from. I mean, there's some speculation. I'm personally a religious person. So there is speculation that these were originally supernatural beings. And especially in Genesis chapter 6, the term Nephilim is connected with the B'nai Elohim, or sons of God. Right. And elsewhere in the Old Testament, that term is used for these semi-divine beings that hang out with the high deity, with the God of the Old Testament. So there could be a supernatural connection there. I don't really touch on it in my book. I just say, there was always a race of giants that existed. How they existed, where they came from, I'm not sure. Okay. But the whole different species of giant, other giant researchers touched on this really well. Andrew Collins and Greg Little. So they argue for the Denisovans as a separate, species that interbred with Homo sapiens, but were a separate species of human, and totally different, but very influential, in human history.
Yes. Because I try to figure out a lot of things. I don't know if you've listened to my show, but it's about the unexplained monsters and paranormal, so I'm over here always trying to figure out like where these supernatural beings, these creatures that people see, where do they come from, and it's real easy for me to throw out words like, they're descendants of the sons of God, that they came down and they did what they did with humans and with animals. And there's the whole idea that they created these offspring, these cyclops, these minotaurs, centaurs, but that would mean that all this stuff existed, and a lot of people don't think that it did. I'm very much a literalist. Okay. I think Eric von Däniken hit this on the head when he says we are too quick to call things mythology. The ancients, we just think of them as, bumbling primitives a lot of time, when in fact they were more advanced than us. And what they wrote down, they only, not everybody was literate. You didn't have a sheet of paper you could just write down. So when they wrote down something, they wrote down important stuff, and stuff that, they perceived to be real. And I think in a lot of ways, was real. Now the language might have gotten mythologized over time. It's like a folk legend, it's like, so I have an ancestor who was in the Civil War. He was just a regular infantryman, but over time, over a couple hundred years, he gets made out to be this great hero who could like shoot 100 people at once or something like that. So the stories get embellished, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a historical core to them. And I think that's exactly what's going on in these myths all around the world, including stuff like, the Cyclopses and stuff like that. I even think, maybe Bigfoot is one of these remnants of these Hopewell, Adena giants that once there were millions of them all over the continent. So I think there's a historical kernel to a lot of stories that people deem fiction or myth. And I think we're too quick to ascribe things to myth. We say, oh, we don't see Cyclopses and stuff anymore, but I think they saw them back then.
What happened to them, that's a whole nother story. But I think they saw them back then.
I think what you said is very important, that not everybody was literate, and those who were, once they go through the process of making this papyrus or paper or whatever, they're not going to waste their time making up stuff. There's going to be historical records.
And that's such a good point, because look at the Egyptians and even Homer. This isn't just my 4-year-old making up a little a 5-sentence story. These are detailed. These are very, very detailed stories. And so people say, let's accept this. Let's accept the detail of these kings, but let's reject this because that seems mythological. You can't do that.
Right.
That to me seems like a bad scholarship.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it made my ears perk up when you said that maybe Bigfoot is connected with these Hopewell or Adena peoples, because especially on the eastern side of the United States, a lot of encounters with Bigfoot, people describe them as being, not 12 feet tall, but more like 7 feet tall. And
with
Native American features, less hairy, more thin, and it would make sense. And the mound that we have, it's in South Charleston. I forget the name of that exact mound, but if my memory serves me correctly, I think they ran a bore, like a scope, down through that and into the skull of a giant skeleton in the center of the mound, and he was surrounded by several smaller skeletons, kind of like, I don't know if they were wives or servants or what.
You get this a lot. So there seems to have been a hierarchy within Hopewell and Adena culture. So the giant will be buried sometimes. So for example, with the Davenport mounds in Davenport, Iowa, you had two giants, a male and a man and a woman. So probably husband and wife, and then around them, mirroring what you get with Egypt, for example, where the pharaohs wanted to be buried with their servants and everything else. So like you said, they're buried around these smaller people who are probably their servants and stuff. Right. Poor servants, they probably didn't want to go to the afterlife, but the king died and forced them to. So you get this a lot in ancient American culture.
Wow. And I had never considered, I've never heard that there was a Semitic tie between, the Adena, for lack of a better word, the Adena people,
Well, in a lot of these mounds, so you not only have the giant skeletons, but you have them buried not only with their servants, but with items of importance. And a lot of these items where they have found these tablets and these relics have been in the mounds as well.
Well, then let me ask you this. Do you think that instead of looking at them like Native Americans and, calling that, the giant in the center there a chief or a chieftain, would it be more like these mounds are an Appalachian version of a pyramid and these are a type of pharaoh?
I think exactly. I think that's exactly what's going on. And you look at Monk's Mound, the dimensions for that are exactly the same as the Pyramid of Giza. I think we're dealing with the same exact groups. So yes, I think we're talking about, and I use this term deliberately, American pyramids. So I think we're talking about the exact same groups. And I think that the structure of government that they had, it seems to have paralleled very, very strongly with what we find in Egyptian and Israelite cultures and Near Eastern cultures.
You're blowing my mind. I'm loving all of this. This is important stuff. I wish I was more well versed on all of this, but I'm learning with every sentence you say here. So let me ask you. Let me back it up, because you just blew my mind. When they crossed over to North America, how did they get here? Was there a land bridge? Did they build ships, or?
It's always been my contention that they sailed over. Now people will say, oh, they couldn't make that that long of a voyage. First off, we know that the Vikings did it.
Right.
They weren't as far away as the Egyptians and the Israelites, but they did make the voyage across the Atlantic. There's also been studies that have been done. So a guy, I was mentioning this on another podcast, recreated a Phoenician ship. There's a whole discussion about this in a magazine that I write for, Ancient American Magazine, but he reconstructed a Phoenician ship, sailed it around the African coast, from the east coast of Africa all the way to the west, all the way up through South America, and came within about 40 miles of Florida. So it was totally possible to make that type of journey in ancient ships, and I believe that that's how they crossed over. And they knew the route to go. So this route was known by Hopewell and Nadina throughout the generations. And I think that a lot of the mounds that you get, so we have mounds in the Midwest, but we also have mounds. My friend Greg Little does an excellent job of this in his book, Encyclopedia of Native American Mounds. We also have mounds on the East Coast in Delaware and in Connecticut. And I think those served as markers for the Hopewell and Nadina who were traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, so that they would know where to go.
My gosh. Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you so much, Adam, for being on here. I love this. So
my pleasure.
They built mounds along the coast, kind of like a lighthouse, like
I've always that's what I've always thought of. Yeah.
Okay. And do we have
it was funny because I was here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Do we have an idea of how long ago that they may have started coming in? Because some of this stuff, it seems like they 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, they're finding relics or whatever, from that long ago.
Yeah. This goes way back. Some researchers have speculated that at least about 3,000 BCE there was migration from the old world to the new world. The famous mystic Edgar Cayce argued that there was Israelite migration 3,000 years ago, which is interesting because, let me rephrase that. He said that there was migration of the lost tribes of Israel around 3000 BCE, which would kind of throw off the dating that mainstream academia has for the Israelites. But that seems to, interestingly be enough, confirmed by archaeology. So calls for a little bit of assessment of, how old is Israelite history? How old were the people who descended from Abraham? So very interesting stuff there. But I think this ties into, what you were talking about earlier. They had known about these routes for hundreds, even thousands of years. So this was no problem for them crossing from the old world to the new world.
Yeah. Wow. I love that you brought up Edgar Cayce. I have one of his books behind me on the wall here. It was one of my favorite reads. There Was a River. It's a great book. I don't know if you read that one or not.
Yes.
But yeah, I love Edgar Cayce.
Yes,
so
if
he says it to me, it's like locked in the vault. That's real. That happened. So yeah, I'll go with that.
Yeah.
Now, there's some different kinds of mounds up in Ohio. There's the serpent mound. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
And what does that whole thing mean? What does that, why did they do that?
Yeah, I am familiar with the serpent mound. I actually got to see it last year in October as I was driving. I had a church conference in Kentucky. So I had to drive through Maryland, West Virginia, Ohio to get there. And on the way back, I stopped there. The serpent mound is fascinating. And I've speculated, and other people have speculated before me, that the serpent there is actually either a Jewish or a Christian symbol, referring to the serpent that you get in the book of Genesis. So this was either a Jewish sect that was kind of heretical, worshiping the serpent, or a Gnostic sect, which was the same thing, which would have been the same situation, worshiping the serpent instead of the Old Testament God, which the Gnostics rejected.
Right.
Very, very fascinating. So I think in the past, scholars just said, well, this was a Native American mound, which it absolutely is. But I think there's fusion between, Native American spirituality there and Old Testament Israelite religion.
Okay. I was afraid you was going to say that it was something that I view it as, dark and nefarious. You know what I mean? If it was an homage to the serpent.
Yeah.
That's pretty scary stuff, man. And all of Appalachia has a really dark and cursed kind of history to it.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating history. Yeah. I remember being in where was it? It was where Stonewall Jackson grew up. Was it Shenandoah Valley?
Yes, I believe so.
And there was a church camp that I used to go to years ago. My parents would drive. It seemed like freaking forever. They would drive from Baltimore all the way to Shenandoah Valley, and there was a summer camp there, and just the history of the area was just so fascinating. It's kind of dark. A lot of, like you said, a lot of paranormal stuff.
Yes.
Going back to the 1800s, big time.
Yes. They said that the area between like West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, and all that, the Native Americans called it like the dark and bloody grounds.
I can see that.
So I don't know if this place was viewed by the Adena as cursed land. Was it cursed because of this snake mound? You're making me think all kinds of other stuff now. It's like that was probably the culture, and that was the mindset of the people there. Maybe this was like an area where all of the people, followed the serpent. Maybe it's cursed land.
Well, it's interesting. I always bring this in here. Like I said, I'm a religious person. I'm part of a Latter-day Saint tradition.
Okay.
And our sacred text, the Book of Mormon, claims to be an ancient account of the inhabitants of North America. Now, here's where the interesting thing is. In that book, they talk about the land being cursed and wretched numerous times. And it seems to be a reference to this for those who accept the view that the Book of Mormon took place in North America. There's a whole other school that says it took place in South America. I think there's better evidence for North America, but that would be kind of the region that you just mentioned.
Wow. And on that note, if the giants are connected to the fallen angels, the watchers, and all that, when the earth was flooded, it seems like the highest peaks would probably been the Appalachian Mountains at that time, because Appalachia used to be the highest mountain range. They say, if you can date the earth, it was 1 billion years old, I believe these mountains are, the New River that runs through it here. Just pure speculation. Do you think that some of these, tainted bloodline, evil, horrible giants fled from the flood times and sought refuge in the Appalachian Mountains even? That would still tie in the
I think that's highly probable.
It would still tie into the same culture.
I think that's totally. I think that's most likely what happened, because it's interesting. Nothing's supposed to exist except for Noah and his family after the flood.
Right.
So you have these Nephilim, these sons of God, these Anakim, and then thousands of years later, Moses and the Israelites encounter these same exact guys in the Promised Land.
Right.
So why are they still existing? And I think that for the biblical authors, there was a flood that wiped everybody out, but it couldn't have wiped everybody out because we get the flood in various traditions. So Native American, South Asian, other ancient Near Eastern stories such as the Epic of Gilgamesh. So clearly some people survived to all give this account of this massive flood. So it was a huge flood, but clearly it didn't kill everybody, and it didn't kill the Anakim, it didn't kill the Nephilim. And I think, yeah, they hit out in the top parts, and when everything dried up, they were able to resume what they do.
Wow. You're making me think a lot. I love it. I love it. So yet, what else you want to talk about? Like, just, I don't know. I haven't got to read your book yet. I just found it today on Amazon. So are there any key parts of your in your research that we haven't been able to touch on yet? Because I know I'm doing a lot of babbling. I feel like I'm sorry about that. I'm just getting excited.
Yeah, it's no problem. No problem. I found the and I was mentioning this to another group. I was talking to. I've always found the tablets and inscriptions that they found here, in Ohio, in Iowa, and other places, just to be, fascinating, because so often initially they've just been dismissed as hoaxes. And I've had the opportunity to study a lot of these tablets up close. I have a background in ancient Near Eastern languages, so I know Hebrew, Phoenician, those languages pretty well. And I've been able to look at this stuff, and not just me. I actually attended a symposium where people from a variety of different backgrounds, epigraphers, archaeologists, etc., had to look at these. And when you look at these closely, you realize that these aren't hoaxes. Now, some of them are. Some tablets are forgeries. Some tablets are fakes. But there is a core there. In fact, I would say the majority of these tablets and of these items with these inscriptions on them, these are legitimate and reflect a specific type of culture. And I find that fascinating. That's something that's largely neglected in mainstream academia, that there is just this rich tradition of these inscriptions here in North America. When we think of inscriptions, we think of the Egyptians, we think of the ancient Near East, but we have inscriptions here in North America that are very rich, and that for the most part haven't really been examined in depth.
But speaking of those, these ancient texts and scripts and tablets, hold on, I'm sorry, writing notes. Are you familiar? Are you able to decipher Ogham?
No, I'm not able. I've heard of it. And I think Scott Walters talked about it a little bit.
Maybe.
I've heard of it. It's fascinating, but yeah, I can't read Ogham.
Okay.
But I know that there are other people. There's a guy who is part of the Black Irish Cherokee, who is able to read it. I'm blanking on his name, but other people can. And it's interesting because Ogham, from what I've heard, appears to have a lot of similarities with biblical Hebrew.
Wow. I'm not shocked. At this point, I'm not shocked because of what you're telling me about, the cultures that came over here and how long ago it might have been. Here, again, in my area, I love learning about my area. They have found Ogham. They were cutting a wall, I guess, back from the road, because our roads go straight through the mountains here. I know you've driven through West Virginia, so they just make roads.
You guys have like a whole tunnel within a whole mountain. I'm like, am I going to hit this mountain? And then it becomes a tunnel.
Yeah, yeah, we're bad for that. They just blast the mountain off, boom, like a tunnel. But yeah, they've discovered Ogham. I think it's Mingo County. It's next door to us here. That they put it up in one of our state parks and just left it out in the weather for decades. And just a few years ago, the Charleston, I think, Museum of Natural History finally got a hold of it and transported it up towards the Capitol.
Yeah. so much of this stuff is just unappreciated. So
Yeah.
people just treat it like crud, and it's so important, it's so pivotal. And I think, thankfully that's changing. But same with the Davenport and the Michigan tablets. You just stayed in a closet, basically, in a at a university for decades. So this stuff needs to be first very well preserved, and needs to be examined and researched, and the findings need to be made public.
Yeah. I saw on your social media that you were recently looking at the Michigan runes. Is that what it's called?
Michigan Relics. Yep.
Michigan Relics. Could you tell me a little bit about that? Because the picture is amazing.
Yeah. So the Michigan Relics, there are literally hundreds of these, and they are related to each other by having something known as the mystic symbol, which is 3 lines and a sideline, which seem to correspond to the divine name of God in Hebrew, the Tetragrammaton, which we spell Yod-He, Vav-He, or YHWH. And on these relics, some of them are inscriptions of people. You have drawings of people, of biblical events such as the flood of Noah, and on these relics is a language that seems to be somewhat decipherable. It contains characters, Greek characters, Hebrew characters, and Egyptian characters. And so I spent last month, I was with about 50 or so people, and all we did was spend a whole week looking at these relics. And it was fascinating because the language is decipherable, and these relics are things that you wouldn't expect if they were forgeries. They're too detailed, they're too well made to be forgeries. And that's not to say that some forgeries don't slip in, but they, close examination of them. And like I said, I've got to touch these relics myself. I've got to study these relics myself. They seem legitimate.
Wow.
And I would argue for the legitimacy.
Really? That's
yeah.
How old do you think these relics are?
Some of them are really old. So there was one relic, we can actually date it pretty well. So it gives a solar eclipse. And if you look at the solar, astronomers can actually do this. If you look at where the stars are positioned in the sky, it goes back to around the 6th century BCE. So if the tablet itself is not that old, it at least preserves a tradition that is that old and that has been passed down on the tablets.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing. And you get to study this stuff,
Yeah, no, it was fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Wow, you're living the dream, man. you get your hands on this ancient history. Let me ask you this while I got you here. Why do you think America, just as a whole, maybe it's our government or historians that, I don't know, they just don't want to rewrite a book or something? Why would they hide or dismiss all of this evidence that's in their face? Why keep our history here, of all places, hidden?
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a very good historical explanation for that, which goes to, the origin of our government and the origin of academia here in America. And those two are intertwined, and both of them kind of academia serving as the intellectual arm of this. Both of them had an agenda to basically squash any knowledge of pre-Columbian America and the idea that Native Americans had a culture, a very sophisticated culture, just as sophisticated as Egypt or Rome or Greece before the arrival of European settlers. And the Smithsonian, interestingly enough, while a lot of these earliest discoveries were made by the Smithsonian, later on they kind of do an about face backtrack and kind of suppress this stuff and try to say that everything is a forgery and a hoax, because if it's real, then that means you have to treat, the Native Americans are, just as sophisticated as you are. You have to treat them as equal humans.
Yes.
And if you're trying to get their land, if you're trying to dehumanize them and destroy them, you can't do that.
Perfect. And you brought up the Smithsonian, and they're hiding giant bones, and I know it. I've read so many articles of where they've kind of forced these giant skeletons and remains onto Native American tribes. Like if you want these remnants, you're taking this along with it, kind of thing. And this intellectual and governmental arm that come in and is trying to hide this all away. Are you talking like the Templars? When Columbus came in, he was funded by the Knights Templar, right? And the Freemasons. Is it them that's trying to hide the true origins of America?
I think the Templars and Freemasons would want the true origins to come out. They came here. I talk about giant migrations, but they weren't the only ones. Of course, the Vikings were here. I think the Templars were here, as Scott Walter has shown, as well. So I think they would want this information to come out, but I think that the powers that be, the people who were in charge, especially in the 1800s and 19th century, when there was really this battle, this kind of manifest destiny, and this battle to get the Indians' land. You have a propaganda campaign that tries to suppress any evidence that would paint the Native Americans in a sophisticated and a positive light. And to give the Smithsonian credit, I think that is slowly changing. And the Smithsonian kind of acknowledges its bias. So I think that's slowly changing. And a lot of this stuff, like you said, the giant bones that were sent to them by thousands of people in the 1800s, slowly they're kind of releasing some of this information that they have. Mounds that they said never existed. Turns out that they have, earliest maps and earliest cartography of these mounds and of these places, and they're slowly releasing them. So I think that there is slowly a shift. But honestly, I think our textbooks need to be rewritten, completely rewritten, because when I was growing up in high school in the 90s, I didn't learn any of this stuff. I didn't even know about this stuff until I was well in my 30s. I think that there just needs to be a complete overhaul. Any textbook on North American history just needs to be rewritten.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can write it.
Maybe.
That would be great.
See.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I was in my 30s too. It was shows like Scott Walter's show that I was like, you gotta be kidding me. They were mining in Minnesota before, 1,000 years or 500 years before Columbus was even a dream, and it makes sense. It makes perfect sense what you're saying about the government of the 1800s, because they were a bunch of, I don't even want to say, I'm trying not to cuss because I don't know if you cuss or not, but they're a bunch of jerks. You know what I mean? They were horrible people, dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was all about expansion and what they did with, the Trail of Tears and all that. Everything you're saying makes sense.
Yeah. Well, the government, this country's treatment of Native Americans has been the cardinal sin of this country.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The land would be understandably cursed. If they could put a curse on the land, I wouldn't blame them.
Yeah.
Hey, that what I mentioned to you before we started recording with this stone head that I've had in my family for close to 70 years. Do you mind if I turn the light on it and you just take a look at it for me? Just
please.
And look, if it was made by like Sears and Roebuck or whatever, just let me know, okay? That would be all right.
Well,
too.
It's funny that you mentioned the Asian features on it, because one of the things I talked about when I was at this symposium, this conference, last month, was the possibility of an Asian migration to North America.
Wow.
There's a book called 1421 by Gavin Menzies, which argues for, about 70 years before Columbus, that there was a Chinese expedition to the United States, to North America, that the native inhabitants remembered, that's recorded in Chinese records. And I think that journey that the emperor did in 1421, he knew how to do that because of earlier traditions that have been passed down to him by Asiatic peoples who had come to North America. And I think that, the earliest of that group may have been giants themselves, which may explain, this statue of this big head with Asiatic features.
Wow. Yes, absolutely. I'm fascinated. I'm gonna hold a scale up here to this head to give you a little bit of a size here. It's good size. This is roughly a 12-inch rule.
Oh wow!
So
that's amazing. I have to ask my friends about that as well. I love to look at it in person sometime.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I would love that. We're not too awful far apart. Now this thing weighs like 90 or 100 pounds, but
oh wow.
Yeah, it's solid. I'm pretty sure, like I said, I think it's limestone or sandstone, rather. Part of it is busted because since it's been in my family for 70 some years, I had a great uncle that used it as a jack stand when they were working on a truck. Look, I'm from West Virginia.
You know what? It must have been pretty strong to hold up.
It is. It's and it's got the ears on the side that I didn't see on hardly anything else I was looking up. But yeah, just the shape of the eyes. My grandmother did paint this, so she painted everything. It's just she painted the whole thing white, like she painted every tree on the bottom of it white. It was like in the garden for a long time. So there, some of these features, it's not any kind of the discoloration is from paint, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I love it. I begged my mom for this thing for like 20 years before she finally gave it to me. But yeah, I appreciate you looking at it for me. And yeah, if we could ever get in person, I would throw him in the passenger seat and we would come out and let you take a look.
Well, I would be totally up for looking at that. I'd love to look at that in more detail.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to look at it because you're an expert. You're looking at these relics. You would know what to look for. You would way more than I do. It looks like there may be some chisel marks or some kind of marks on the back, but but I don't know what I'm looking at, man. You know what I mean? So
yeah, so much of stuff that people have found. I've talked to people from all over this country who have found stuff, and just there's a need to look at it. We're so busy looking at ancient stuff from across the seas and in other parts of the world. We have so much rich history here that we haven't looked at yet. And I think I'm really glad shows like this are able to touch on it.
I appreciate that. This is one of my first swings at talking about the ancient America, the ancient world. There's a podcast. I don't mind shouting them out because it's probably my favorite show. I like them better than I like my own show. It's called Blurry Creatures. Do you ever listen to Blurry Creatures?
Yeah. I actually they invited me one time to do a podcast with them. So yeah.
Yes, I would love to hear you on their show because they're more knowledgeable about this than I am. And as much as I'm benefiting from getting to talk to you myself, I think they could probably pull information that is just sitting there waiting for me to ask that I just don't know how to ask. You know what I mean? So I think that I would love to hear you on their show too, man. I think they're great. Well, Mr. Stokes, is there anything that you want to plug or bring up to anybody, like maybe mention your social media or plug your book or anything like that?
So I have an Instagram account, which you've been on, Adam the Giant Guy. I have a personal Facebook page, but I invite people. You can Facebook friend request me. I put a lot of stuff for my family on there, but I also put stuff about ancient giants in ancient America as well. And I have a tutoring website because my main job is as high school Latin teacher,
Awesome.
called Lingua Classica. And you can, there's also a Facebook webpage. You can check that out as well. I'm a a monthly contributor to Ancient American Magazine. I usually always have an article or a blurb in there. And of course, my book that you mentioned, From Egypt to Ohio. And I'm currently working on a new book now. But with being a high school teacher, I sometimes get really, really busy. So maybe a while before that one comes to print, but hopefully it will.
Awesome. That's great. I didn't know you taught high school. I'm a high school teacher too.
Oh, okay. Nice.
I don't teach anything as advanced as Latin. I teach mainly life skills in a little quasi-military setting. You know, it's a class that replaced ROTC. So I'm in there trying to get kids in line and teach them some stuff that mom and dad neglected to teach them.
They don't do ROTC anymore, ROTC?
Not in West Virginia.
Okay.
And there might be a few schools that still do it, but they've replaced it with a new program. And a big part of it is because of our opioid pandemic. There's a lot of broken homes, and so they have veterans come in that have a little bit of a background that can get a hold of kids, and we try to get them, try to show them that they can work through whatever they've already been through. We can improve their life. So
that's wonderful. That's definitely needed. Yeah. It's been a trying time for young people.
Yes,
so
yeah. And this last year and a half has really hurt them as far as, their social and emotional needs.
Yeah. And I know last year, and part of the year before, they were just completely online, and not having that interaction with anybody. So that's always rough.
Yeah. I got kids that are, and it's nothing negative, that they'll come to class and they're literally shaking, they're nervous because these kids were in 8th grade last time they were in the building, and now they're sophomores in high school.
Yeah.
And it's just a big culture shock for them. It's a big swing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. It's much needed.
Thank you. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. I wish I knew Latin. That is awesome.
Well, it's funny. I went kicking and screaming because my parents made me take it in 7th grade, and I didn't want to take it, and I hated it at first, and then look at me now. Yeah,
look where it's brought you, man. Thank you, parents.
Indeed.
Oh, well, look, I've loved having you on here, and I heard you say something at the very beginning of this, and if you have just a few minutes, you mentioned something about Atlantis. Would you tell me what your theory of Atlantis is, real quick, or real long? It don't matter to me. I don't have anything else to do. So.
Yeah. I got fascinated by Atlantis. I read a lot of Casey's writings on Atlantis. Greg Little, my friend, has written a book on it. So I've always been fascinated by it. But I always consider it to be, that civilization that we have on the husk of history. So before written history begins, it was that civilization that was the most well-known and the most elaborate. But kind of reflecting the story of the giants, I think in North America, it kind of fell through its own pride, through its own excesses. And we don't really have that much knowledge about it, except for what's been preserved, in the traditions of Plato and others. So, but I think that, if there was a source for where the giants came from, especially with the advanced technology that, we find with the Hopewell and Adena and with giant cultures around the world, I think, that points to a race memory of Atlantis, especially the pyramids and stuff like that.
Wow. I love it. Thank you. Because I've never spoken to anybody about Atlantis. I know very little. I know Edgar Casey has a couple books on it, but I didn't buy them. Yeah. I didn't buy those because I was like, well, I don't want to open that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I might never come back.
You know Casey has a tiny book on Atlantis. It's maybe like 100 pages. I would definitely recommend you reading it before you die.
Okay, will do. Well,
Yeah,
if I don't
really
die
good
today. Oh man. Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on here, man. I would like to keep in touch with you through Instagram or emails, or
That'd be great.
You can call me if you want to. I don't care. Thank you a million times over for doing this for me.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, man. If anything else comes up, if anything crosses your mind that you want to add to the show, just holler at me and we'll do it, okay?
Will do. Will do. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thank you. And have a good night.
You too.
All right.